Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2014. The topic is nutrition, and the title is Which Diet is Right? One of my clients is a personal trainer. Actually, over half of my clients are personal trainers. And they sent me the following message in their journal. All my online clients have a journal they can write in every single week. I write back answers. It's a Google Docs. They can write in at 24/7, and I respond every week. So it's fun. We talk about training, nutrition, any questions they have, and then a lot of the trainers will just share fun anecdotal stories about their clients, which is just, it brings up good educational conversation for us. And now it does bring up good stuff for the podcast. So they wrote the following. I had two clients in one day argue with me about whether they should be following a low-fat or a low-carb diet. And bonus, they both said high protein was bad for their health. For both clients, I teach them. I taught them what you taught me. Eat carbs, fats based on preference and time of the day. But they were each saying that advice is unhealthy. Oh no. One said high carb diets were bad. The other said high fat diets are bad. It drives me nuts. I'm sure you deal with this all the time. What do you do when clients say things like this? Yes. So thankfully I don't deal with this as much anymore, because I think before people reach out to me now, they are familiar with me. They've talked with a friend or a current client or past client. Maybe they've listened to a couple podcasts. So they usually have a little bit of more awareness of kind of what I do. But I do still run into this from time to time, and way more of it when I was younger in my career. So there is an approach I use that I shared with this client that I thought would be fun for the podcast, but then also just I thought it would make a good conversation. Is when you're thinking about, what diets are right, like which diet is right. That is an interesting wording, because when somebody tries to be right, it's that automatically is like a little bit of a red flag. Because when it comes to the world of nutrition, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of, we think this is true. As much as we can know right now, we think this is true kind of thing. It's just, there's a lot of it that's up to debate. And typically, in my mind, I'm not looking for what's right. I'm just trying to say, okay, what's going to get me to my goal and keep me alive for a long time? So that doesn't necessarily mean right as much as I'm not trying to find what's right versus wrong as much as I'm just what's optimal. And there's a little bit of a difference there in the sense that I recognize that for me, what works best isn't maybe the same as for you what would work best. There are often just an infinite, number of ways that people can apply food to their life and their goals and their needs, their preferences, that there really, in my mind, isn't a one way to do it, and there doesn't need to be. So, typically what I do in this situation is I would acknowledge that the person, if they're bringing up carbs are bad for you because of this. And I'm like, I've seen some research and studies, and if they do suggest that. Or, if they say that about fats. Now, I don't lie. Like, if I've not heard any single thing about the thing they're saying, I'll just say, well, that's interesting. I haven't heard anything about that. So I'm just truthful. Thankfully, I never really had the idea that, but I've had past trainers say, are you afraid to say you don't know it? Like, if you don't know it, they're going to think that you don't know everything. I'm like, no, and that's just, if I don't know, I don't know. I mean, I try to learn as much as I can. I try to read as much as I can, but there are definitely going to be names when people throw out names that I've never heard of, or they're throwing out something like a concept or something, and I'm like, oh, geez, don't know about that. It's just the truth of the matter is you're going to know a lot as a trainer. You're going to know a lot of ways to get people to goals. That's going to be kind of an interesting way of putting it, is I know a lot of pathways. I know how to get people there. Now, if they say, for example, I won't eat out of anything that's plastic, everything has to be, glass or ceramic, and I'll be like, okay, cool. Okay, like that, I'm totally fine with that. You do that. Like, if that's what you want, crush it. Do it. It doesn't matter to me. I can get you there whether you eat everything out of glass or ceramic or metal and no plastics. Totally fine. Okay with that. Not going to get in the way. If somebody said, I'm not going to eat any carbohydrates, I'd be like, well, we can definitely do a keto diet, and you could do keto to gain muscle. You can do keto to lose fat. You can do keto to be good at a sport. There are going to be some maybe experiential aspects that are pretty miserable, and it's going to be a little more troublesome trying to find the right foods and whatnot. And I only mean that in the sense that if they're not coming from that world already, and they're switching from a mixed diet to now wanting to do pure keto, there's a learning curve. So there's an experiential moment where we're going to have to figure that out. Can it be done? Sure, absolutely. So if they want to do it that way, totally fine. Doesn't matter. So I try to acknowledge what they're saying in some way, meaning that if they say it to me, I'm not just going to immediately start to try to counter what they said. I do want to do like active listening. I want to respond back with what they said to me, process that a little bit, give a couple back and forths before I move on to the next thing. But the thing I move on to is we want to orient the degree of risk when you're talking about nutritional risk, whether it's, high carbs, like high fats, high proteins, or, whether things are organic or not organic. Like, I've had people tell me everything should be organic, but then also people tell me that the worst thing you could do is eat organic because of the different pesticides and things. So, you name it, I've heard it. So I'll acknowledge it and then say that the degree of risk is almost always associated with a deficiency or an excess of that thing. So you're either going to run into problems, like you're going to have a risk when you have an insufficient amount or when you have an excessive amount. I like to usually bring back to the point that the body is pretty much okay with everything when we use it in appropriate and kind of like moderate amounts. Now, there are certain things like trans fats. No. Like, let's try to get rid of all trans fats. We do want to limit sugar, but is sugar the worst thing in the world? No. Like, there are moments where you can have sugar and it's not going to hurt you. Assuming you don't have pre-existing conditions, blah, blah, blah. But there's rarely, like alcohol. I guess, like, alcohol is something that is never going to be good for you. So, whatever the benefit of alcohol is, I'm sure you can get it from something else. I don't think alcohol is like going to be the only route to get whatever the benefit of alcohol would be. Trans fats, probably not going to be good for you in any amount, so you want to cut that out. So there are certain things, very few, but certain things that you don't want to have any. But for the most part, the body can process things. Like if you have some trans fats, you're going to die immediately? No. If you drink some alcohol, you're going to die immediately? No. So typically, even the things that we would want to be very limited in, they're not going to kill us immediately. Does that mean that like they're okay? No. But we have to kind of put it in perspective. When people come and say, if you eat, sugar, you're going to fuel, like that feeds cancer cells. Okay. Typically, like anything we eat calorie-wise, anything that grows a cell, a natural healthy cell, is going to grow a cancer cell. So, what are you going to do? Take away all food? You can't really do that, right? So, recognize what they say, give acknowledgement to it, then orient that the degree of risk is most often and very likely associated with it being a deficiency or an excess. And then I kind of go through a little bit, and depending on how interesting, like if the person's interested in hearing me talk back, or if they just want to spout some stuff off and they're not really open-minded, I'll change my answers. But thinking through like glucose, for example, like the brain is made to operate on glucose. It will absolutely operate on ketones. When you go ketogenic diet, your brain's fine. It'll figure it out. Might be kind of foggy-minded, little forgetfulness kind of thing for a day or two or whatever. And then the brain switches over. It does a good job, and it'll run on ketones. But it is made to process glucose. So glucose, to some degree, is okay in the sense that our body is designed to use it. Dietary fats. They are important. They help with cell formation and growth. They play a role in hormone health. They also help with vitamin absorption. There's fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K. Then protein. Yes, excessive protein could potentially cause kidney issues, but that's an extreme, crazy excess. You'd be talking about like well over 2 times your body weight for months on end, and then maybe you're going to start to have some kidney issues. But protein repairs and builds structures of the body. It's what our muscles are made of. There's a lot of good that protein does, just like there's good things that fats do. And glucose can be used. It isn't essential. We can live without glucose. But it can definitely be used. The body's designed to use it. So all of these things can be useful, and or the body is made to use them. So to some degree, within a controlled amount, they're all going to carry a low risk. But it's a risk that we would be willing to trade for, given the benefit. Given that protein builds muscles and does a lot of good things for us. That in a proper amount of protein intake, the positives outweigh the negatives. Dietary fats, they help build cell walls. They help with hormonal health. They help with vitamin absorption. So within appropriate amounts, the benefits are worth the risks, worth the trade-offs, right? Within controlled amounts, these foods are going to be okay. If we actually are too low in fat, it'll lower the immune system. It will negatively impact hormonal health. You'll have the vitamin deficiencies. So we can survive off of our body fat. Like, you actually don't need to eat dietary fat. Your body will chew away your body fat for as long as it can, but eventually it's going to need some dietary fats. So dietary fats would be considered essential in the human diet, in the sense that if you have some body fat, you can survive without them for a while, but you do eventually need them. Protein, absolutely need it. It will cause loss of muscle, loss of immune system, organ failure. We can't survive very long without protein. Our body will start to eat our muscles, and then a lot of bad things happen. I've experienced that like firsthand with clients with eating disorders like anorexia, to where they have been hospitalized due to organ issues because they've gone so prolonged amount of time with insufficient protein intake that the body's actually catabolized and eaten their muscles to the point where it's starting to eat the organs. And I've worked with those clients to help them rebuild their healthier habits and help them understand how nutrition works, so they can start to eat better and get the hell out of the hospital, and their family can actually trust them to stay alive, and they can take care of themselves, they can feel better about themselves. So there's a lot to unpack there. But I've literally helped clients who were hospitalized and had that as the outcome. So it's beyond a textbook. That literally does happen. Carbs, if you're too low in carbohydrates, we can survive without carbs. They're not essential. But it doesn't automatically mean that they're harmful. Our brain can operate off glucose. Our muscles actually store glucose as energy reserves in the form of glycogen. Our body is made to process carbs. They're not essential, but they absolutely can be used, and within an appropriate amount have the more positive outcome than the negative. So the pros can outweigh the cons. Likely what the clients are hearing when they speak on these aspects, like when they say, high fat diets are going to kill you. That's okay. It's too generalized and it's too extreme. They're usually hearing some isolated fragment of truth, and it's typically associated with excessive intake, but they're not hearing that part of it. So it'll be a person who sells a fat digesting supplement that'll tell you that high fat diets will kill you. It's a person who sells a supplement that reduces blood glucose response after a meal. That'll tell you that glucose will kill you. Often what they hear is cherry-picked by the person that's saying it to have the response that they want, whether that's to buy a product, buy a program, or just to be relevant in social media. If I say some bold, crazy claim, I will get more clicks and views, and then I can have more notoriety. So even if I'm not selling a product, I'm selling myself. And then therefore, if I get more clicks and views, I get money from YouTube, or I get sponsorship money, or I get money to go paid to be on talks and, discussion boards and whatnot. It's often a weaponized approach in the sense that they're doing it for an outcome that is not just educational. They're not just trying to educate people. They're trying to get something from it. And that's typically something for themselves. So you'll hear, carbs will increase blood glucose, and, that causes diabetes. So when you eat carbohydrates, you're going to become diabetic. No, that's not a direct, A leads to B. If you eat carbs, it feeds cancer. So I've had clients tell me, I don't have any sugar at all because sugar causes cancer. No. Fat. Diets that are high in fat have been linked to. There's research looking into diets high in fat and depression, osteoporosis, age-related memory loss, cognitive decline, macular degeneration, multiple sclerosis, infertility, endometriosis. I looked all that up. I don't have that in the top of my mind. But I actually looked at it because I wanted to see what was some of the latest research. So I looked at that, and that was the crazy long list. And there were actually other ones. But that's the list right now for research that is connected with high-fat diets that would be potentially negatives. So the negatives of a high-risk, high-fat diet. And then there were the risks of high carbs. And it also brought into sugar addiction and dopamine responses and changes. So there's a lot. There's a lot. When you look at protein, kidney function, increased cancer risk, heart disease, a whole bunch of stuff. So when you look at research, if you want to, you could pick for every single type of food that in some way it will kill you. There is research, there are claims basically that if either they're correlative in nature or they're hey, we've seen that in patients with cancer, they tend to eat high protein diets. Well, that doesn't mean protein causes cancer. It just means in patients with cancer, they tended to have high protein diets. Literally, that's all. It's just that. That's all that means. They are doing research now to try to connect that, but there's absolutely no proof that one causes the other. One of the favorite ones, from grad school and stuff we talked about, was a person who smokes is likely to drive a red car. There's a correlative nature between smoking and having a red vehicle. It doesn't mean that when you smoke a cigarette, your car automatically is going to turn to red. So if I have a silver car and I light up a cigarette, I'm not going to walk outside and it's going to be red. Or just because I drive a red vehicle, I'm not going to all of a sudden start smoking. Right? We would look at those two things and very common sensely, we can say, okay, those two are they're related, but they're not causing. There's correlation and causation. So things can be correlated, but it doesn't mean one causes the other or the other causes that. There's not a back and forth kind of causation type relationship. It's important that we understand that. And often for our clients, they maybe just haven't had the exposure to the amount of information that we have had as trainers. And I would encourage them always to look up other information. I remember when I worked at a nutrition supplement store, there was a lady who would come in and she's a pain in the butt. Good God. Super big pain in the butt. But she would come in and often like say how protein powders were causing cancer. And I'm like, lady, why'd you even come in here? Like you just want to harass me. I don't even own the place. I'm not in charge of what's on the shelf. Like, why are you giving me a hard time? But one of the things I always loved is she would always start a statement with they. She's like, well, they say protein causes cancer. And I'm like, who's they? And she was dumbfounded. She was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, what do you mean? What do I mean? Like when you say they say it causes cancer, who is they? She's like, well, I read it in a magazine or I read it online. And I'm like, okay, like, was it a doctor? Was it a nutritionist? Like, was it just an article in a newspaper? Like, what was the source? Like, was it your neighbor? Like we all, like, there was a comedian, I think, Nate Bargatze had an act where an overweight friend was telling another overweight friend that you got to watch fruit. Fruit has sugars and, that sugars will make you fat. He goes, I don't know anybody that's fat from fruit. Like, if you tell me that you have a friend that got fat from eating fruit, I want to meet your fat fruit friend. And he does it much better than I do. But it's crazy because people will latch onto information that confirms a bias that they maybe already have. So maybe when doing a high-fat diet, they went to get blood work done and their cholesterol was sky high. And they're like, oh man, high-fat diets cause high cholesterol. That's going to cause heart problems. Anybody that eats a high-fat diet is going to die of a heart attack. No, that's not true. You can have a high-fat diet that doesn't directly cause high cholesterol. You can also have a high-carb fat diet that has high cholesterol. So often a person will have a personal experience or a friend of theirs, the cousin, the neighbor, the whatever, that'll have an experience, and then they broaden that out to then being like, okay, this is true for everyone. And as much as that is just an obvious flaw in human thinking, people do that all the time, which is a little bit crazy. I don't know if... don't know why people do it, because it seems very common sense that it can't possibly be true. Otherwise, half the population would be dead, because if half the population is doing high carb, half is doing high fat, why aren't all the high carb people dead? Or why are all the high fat people dead? So it's just like, yeah. So I'll move on. But this is typically the approach that I would use. So if a trainer is struggling with this, or if you have a friend is telling you something you're doing, oh, you're eating all that protein trying to build muscle, you better be careful, that protein powder causes cancer. Be like, yeah, whatever, just let it roll off your back. But I usually, if it's a client, I'll acknowledge what they say, because I do want to, I'm not perfect in life. And as I've learned things, I have also learned that things I used to think were true aren't true. In the process of learning, it is nice if you have people around you who can guide you through that process in a kind way. I want to be the kind person. So as much as I talk shit in the podcast, if somebody comes up to me and says something dumb, I'm not going to talk shit on them. I'm not going to make them feel like an idiot. I'm going to acknowledge what they said, give some context to what they said, and try to educate. So I've talked about this example before, but I had a client who they were drinking soda and they thought that clear soda didn't have any calories. And whenever they said that to me, in my mind, I was like, what? What do you mean? And in their mind, they thought that clear soda didn't have calories. So if you could see through the soda, it didn't have calories. So they were drinking Sprite and 7-Up like no one's business because they didn't think it had any calories. And as much as I could say it in a nice way, I was like, did you look at the nutrition label? And they go, what do you mean? I said, the thing on the bottle, like the thing on the can. Did you ever spin it around and look at it? Like, did you see that it has calories? And I kid you not, I had to look it up on Google so I could look up a label for them. And I showed them a label. And their mind was blown, absolutely blown, that a clear soda had calories. They had never just turned the label around to look at it. And as crazy to me as that seems, I have been in places in my life, I guarantee it. I'm biased to myself, so I'm not thinking of them right away. But I guarantee that I've thought things in the past that was as simple as someone saying, just turning it around and look at the label. And then when I did, it was like, okay. So when a client comes to me with that, I want to acknowledge what they're saying. And then that's when I take it from there. I orient the degree of risk. Usually it's from a perspective of deficiency and excess. So as long as we're in appropriate amounts, we're going to be okay. So for my clients, I urge them to aim for an appropriate calorie window because we know that that's going to ensure that we don't have deficiencies. It's also going to ensure that we don't have excesses. So aim for a certain calorie window. And then we want to have at least the minimum protein recommendation. So maybe they're not a big fan of protein, but I can at least get them to agree that some protein is helpful. I'm like, we got to have some protein for muscle tissue. We got to have some protein for the organs. Got to have some protein for growing your hair, your skin, your nails. It regulates body temperature. It regulates acidity in the blood. And they're like, okay, I got it. And I'm like, so the bottom recommendation is, and like it's 0.6 grams per pound of body weight, and that would be lean body weight. And I'm like, are you okay with that? Let's start there, see how you feel. And I'm not going to force you to eat more, but if all of a sudden, we're kind of feeling beat up in our training, our elbows are kind of a little achy, our body's not feeling great, that's a sign that maybe we're not repairing the muscles as much, the connective tissue as much. So maybe a little bit of protein. Maybe we can go to 0.7. So I get them to start at a place that's, common ground, and then adjust and teach along the way from there. And if they believe in a low-carb approach, so this is what that client was running into, is they had a client who believed in a low-carb approach, and they were mad at my client, the trainer, for not telling others to do a low-carb diet. What I would do as the trainer is point out to that client that, there are also people with an opposing view. There are people that would tell me that you should only have high-fat diets. There are people that should tell me you should only eat organic foods. Then there's people that say you should never eat organic foods. There are often so variable of perspectives that if we were to choose one perspective, that means that we are believing all other perspectives are wrong, but there isn't enough definitive proof in research to say that that is true. There is not enough research that says XYZ is 100% right, no risks, no counterpoints, it's 100% true. There's no research that says that. So since the research doesn't believe that there is a definitive right or wrong yet, what I would encourage people to do is what they want to do. So then what I tell them is, as a trainer, I don't have the right to tell anyone what to do. So even if I did believe in a low-carb diet, or I believed in a low-fat diet, or whatever diet I believed in, I don't have the right to tell anyone what to do. I make suggestions. That's what I do. That's my job. I make suggestions based off of science, based off of past personal experience, past client experience. That's it. I make suggestions. And then the client gets to decide whether they listen or not. I can only say what I've seen work and then help them implement the version that they're comfortable with into their life to get the results that they want. But that's my role. My role is to make suggestions based off of science, based off of my education, based off of my personal experience, client experience, all of that. I put it all together and say, hey, given your situation, this is what I think would work best, given our goals and long-term overall health. They then get to decide whether they want to do that or not, or to what degree they want to do that. So if I tell a client that they can have whatever amount of carbs and fats they want, and they choose a low-carb diet, great. If they choose a low-fat diet, great. If they choose to eat things out of glass and ceramic and metal and not plastic, great. They choose to do whatever the hell it is. I don't like organic or not organic, great. You do you. So let's implement the calories, let's implement the protein, let's implement the distribution of those calories and protein, maybe a little bit of sugar control. Let's find the parameters that we know will get the outcome we want. And then the minor details from there, the person can manipulate and choose what best fits them. So that is my approach as a trainer to how to handle that conversation. I said it in a very long-winded way, so that was over 30 minutes. So you will likely want to find a more concise way of saying all that. But that's my thoughts, that's my approach on how to handle those things. So when we look at which diet is right, in my mind, there isn't a right diet. We're not looking for a diet that's right. We're just looking for a diet that will lead to the outcome we want in a safe and effective manner that fits well into our lifestyle and our preferences. Boom. And then whatever that is what we should be doing. Hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully it was interesting. If you have any questions, if you need anything, you can always reach out on our website, www.brutalirongym.com. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form. You can always send me any questions you want. I respond to everybody within 2 weeks. So please reach out. I really actually enjoy it when people reach out. I love that. It motivates me to keep this going every single day. That's why I've made 2,014 of them, is knowing that somebody cared and somebody benefited from it. So if you like the podcast, if you find any benefit from it, please reach out. It's really motivating to hear from you. And then if you like the podcast, please consider sharing it. You can tell people in the conversation. You can share it on social media, however you do it. I appreciate that you do it, and hopefully they will as well. If you like the podcast, you can also consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. There are yearly hosting costs and all that stuff. So if you want to donate to help cover some of that, I greatly appreciate it. So that way this isn't such a crazy bad business decision in regards to the time spent and money spent. I just love doing it, and I'm going to try to keep doing it forever. So I appreciate the donations, that they do help cover some of that cost. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.